Chapter 1. The Spell. The forum thread was titled, Ancient Focus Rituals for Modern Deadlines? Urgent. And the original poster, Arcane Gamer 420, had a profile picture of an anime catgirl holding a battle axe. Emma stared at it. She stared at it with the glazed, 1,000-yard focus of a woman who had been awake for 22 hours, had a branding guide for an artisanal dog biscuit company due in 4 hours, and whose brain had been replaced, at some point around midnight, by a wad of damp cotton. "This is rock bottom," she said to the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. They did not disagree. The spell, and she used the word loosely, the way one might call a Greyhound bus a chariot, required 3 candles, a bay leaf, and the recitation of 4 words that looked like a cat had walked across a keyboard. She lit the candles. Tea lights. Vanilla-scented. They were the only ones she had, and they smelled like a Bath and Body Works had died in her kitchen. Cla-te, she read from her phone, enunciating with the exaggerated precision of the truly sleep-deprived. Barada nikto then thari. Nothing happened. She waited. The candles flickered. Her refrigerator hummed its tuneless, eternal song. Potato, her cat, watched from the microwave with the resigned expression of a creature who had seen everything and judged all of it. "Don't look at me like that," she told him. "I've tried caffeine, I've tried a cold shower, I tried a mindfulness app and it made me mindfully aware of how much I'm panicking. Occult internet forums are a perfectly reasonable next step." Potato blinked. Once. Slowly. The cat equivalent of a sigh. "Right," she said. Obviously this was stupid. She blew out the candles and turned back to her laptop. And that was when every light in the apartment went out at once. The air changed. Not dramatically, not smoke and cello swells. It just went cold. December cold, in the middle of June. The scent of vanilla was replaced by something older. Stone and dust. And the faintest trace of something metallic. And then there was a man in her kitchen. He was standing beside her refrigerator. Tall, dark-haired, and pale in a way that didn't look unhealthy so much as deliberate. He was wearing a dark gray coat that looked like it cost more than her rent. His expression was not one of menace, or mystical grandeur, or even surprise. It was mild irritation. "Well," he said. "This is inconvenient." Emma stared at him. Her cat, Potato, who had been sleeping on the microwave, opened one eye, assessed the situation, and went back to sleep. "There's a man in my kitchen," she said. "Yes." "There wasn't a man in my kitchen 30 seconds ago." Also correct. "The door is locked. The windows are closed. How are you in my kitchen?" "You summoned me." "I did not summon you. I was reading a forum post and saying nonsense syllables over a bay leaf." Those were not nonsense syllables. He brushed something invisible off his sleeve, the gesture of a man who had been interrupted mid-task and found the whole business beneath him. "And the bay leaf is irrelevant. The words are what mattered." "Who are you?" "Felix Bellamy." He said it the way someone gives their name at a dentist's office. Not a threat, not an introduction, a formality. "And you have just performed a binding incantation, with actual witch blood, apparently, which is unexpected." "Why is it unexpected?" "Because you appear to be a graphic designer working on," he tilted his head at her laptop screen, "dog biscuit branding. At 3 a.m, using fonts that lack conviction." "Excuse me, my fonts are fine." "Your serif choices suggest indecision. But that is not the immediate problem." "What is the immediate problem?" "The words you said. They are not gibberish. They are old tongue. Specifically, they are a binding incantation, and they should not have worked, because the old tongue requires witch blood to activate. Witch blood died out of most mortal lines 3 centuries ago." "I don't have witch blood," Emma said. "I'm from Croydon." Croydon has produced stranger things. Has it? I was being polite. The point is, somewhere in your ancestry, someone had enough residual craft to make those 4 words stick. He gestured between them, a small economical movement. And now, here I am. Here you are, in my kitchen, at 3 a.m. Yes. And what exactly are you? Because the cold skin, no blinking, appeared from nowhere thing is giving me a very specific vibe. What vibe would that be? The kind that involves garlic and crucifixes. Am I warm? You are, in fact, extremely warm. That is part of the problem. He paused. But yes, I am a vampire, if that helps clarify things. It does not help clarify things. It makes things significantly worse. I understand the feeling. He did not seem panicked. He did not seem angry. He seemed, if anything, mildly put out. You're very calm about this, she said. I've been alive for 150 years. This doesn't rank in my top 20 inconveniences. Being magically teleported into a stranger's kitchen doesn't rank. I once attended a vampire court session that lasted 11 days. A contested napkin arrangement. 2 people died. Over napkins. It was a complicated century. The point is, this, he gestured at the apartment, is temporary. We find the counter incantation, reverse the binding, and I return to my evening. What were you doing this evening? Sitting. Just sitting. In a chair, in my flat. It was adequate. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. It was a comfortable chair. Okay, how stuck are we? Can you just walk out? I tested it on the way in. Your hallway is my current limit. Beyond that, I deteriorate. Rapidly. So you're stuck in my flat. In your proximity, specifically. If you leave, I have to follow. If you stay, I stay. It is. If you say manageable, I'm going to scream. An inconvenience. She studied him, the not blinking, the pallor, the cold that radiated off him like an open window. And what are you, exactly? Because I have a theory and I don't love it. I think you already know. Say it anyway. I'm a vampire. Right, wonderful. My tea lights summoned a vampire. She turned back to her laptop. I'm finishing the dog biscuit logo. You're sleeping on the couch. I don't sleep. Then you're sitting on the couch, quietly, don't touch anything. I had no plans to. And Felix? He stopped in the doorway. If you eat my cat, I will find a way to make this binding work in reverse, and I will send you somewhere much worse than Croydon. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, not quite. The ghost of a possibility that a smile might once have existed in the general vicinity. Your cat is safe, he said. He and I have similar energy. He walked into her living room, sat on the far end of her couch with the precise posture of a man who has not relaxed in 40 years, and went very still. Emma turned back to her branding guide. What, she thought, the absolute hell. Chapter 2. The Opt-Out. 3 days into the binding, Emma had established the following. Felix Bellamy was 150 years old. He had been turned at 26. He lived alone in a flat in Kensington that he described, when pressed, as adequate. What do you do? She asked, on the second morning, handing him a mug of tea out of politeness. He held it without drinking, the warmth a novelty against his cold hands. Do? For work, for money, for a reason to get up in the morning. I don't get up in the morning. Mornings are for the sun, and the sun is not for me. You know what I mean. What do you do with your time? I manage. You manage what? Existing. That's not a hobby, Felix. That's a diagnosis. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a phone. It was a silver flip phone, a Nokia. The kind of phone that had been cutting edge when Tony Blair was in his first term. Is that, she said very carefully, your phone? Yes. That phone, right there, in your hand. in the year 2026. It makes calls, it sends texts, it has a torch function. It has a torch function? What else would a phone need to do? Take photos, access the internet, maps, music, banking, literally everything that happens in the modern world. None of those things interest me. When did you buy that phone? 2006. Felix, that phone is 20 years old. And it still works, which is more than I can say for most modern devices. That phone is old enough to drink. It has never let me down. She stared at him. He stared back, his expression the perfect, placid blankness of a man who genuinely saw no problem. What about food delivery? She tried. When you need supplies, how do you? Basil arranges it. What if Basil isn't available? Basil is always available. It is his function. But what if you wanted to order something yourself? Pizza, a book, anything. Why would I want to do that? Because you live in the world, Felix. I live adjacent to it. There's a meaningful distinction. When was the last time you watched a film? I canceled my Netflix subscription in 2014. Why? Nothing was happening. On Netflix. On Netflix. In the world, generally. He took a sip of his tea, seemed surprised by it, and set it down. I believe the popular term is quiet quitting. I quiet quit existence approximately 40 years ago. That's not what quiet quitting means. The principle transfers. Emma sat back and looked at him, this pale, composed, absurdly handsome man in his expensive coat, holding a flip phone from the Blair era and drinking tea for apparently the first time in decades. He was not confused by the modern world. He was not baffled by it. He had simply decided at some point that none of it was worth the effort. That, she thought, was much sadder than confusion. But how do you get blood? She asked on the fourth morning, watching him drink from a thermos he'd brought from his flat. Basil, his associate, had delivered it to the hallway like a room service order. Basil arranges it. From where? I don't ask. You don't ask where your blood comes from? Do you ask where your coffee beans come from? They're from Guatemala. It says so on the bag. He looked at her as if she'd revealed something unexpectedly interesting. You read the bag. Everyone reads the bag, Felix. I assure you, they do not. Basil was a problem in his own right. He was 300 years old, built like a retired librarian, and operated on the fundamental principle that everything was part of a conspiracy. He arrived on the fourth evening, rapping on the door with the precise rhythm of someone who had opinions about door knocking. Emma opened it to find a slight, gray-haired man in a tweed jacket, holding a leather satchel and wearing an expression of grim vindication. So it's happened, he said, stepping past her without introduction. The witch lines have destabilized. I told you in 1987, Felix. I have the memo. You have a memo for everything, Basil. Because everything I have warned about has eventually come to pass. The memo is a record of my prescience. He set his satchel on the table and turned to Emma. You have witch blood. Apparently. Dormant for how many generations? I genuinely don't know. My gran made a lot of herbal tea, but I thought that was just a personality trait. Herbal tea. Basil's eyes narrowed. What kind of herbal tea? I don't know, chamomile? With weird bits in it? The weird bits. Were they dried flowers? Root shavings? Small, unidentifiable seeds? I was 7. I wasn't cataloging the botanical content. You should have been. It would have saved us considerable trouble. He opened his satchel and produced a stack of yellowed papers. I've been tracking witch line dormancy patterns since 1953. The convergence was due. I said as much. No one listens. I listened, Felix said from the couch. I simply didn't care. Which is indistinguishable from not listening. Basil spread the papers on the table. The binding she triggered, inadvertently, he added, with a courtesy that almost sounded like an accusation, has activated a resonance that will continue to escalate. Wait, Emma said. Before we get to escalation, why him? I said random words into the air. Why did the spell grab this specific vampire out of however many there are in the world? Basil looked at her as if she'd asked something obvious. A binding seeks the path of least resistance. A vampire with strong ties, court, coven, mate, would have resisted the pull. The spell would have glanced off them like light off a mirror. He turned to Felix. You, Felix, have spent 40 years with no ties to anything. No court allegiance, no coven bonds, no mate. You were, for lack of a better term, spiritually available. The most unanchored vampire in range. The silence that followed was pointed. Manageable, Felix said to the ceiling. Escalate how? Emma asked. The bond will deepen. His vampire nature will pull toward you. Your dormant craft will surface. If left unchecked, the energies will destabilize. Define destabilize. Basil looked at Felix. Felix looked at the ceiling. Neither of them answered. Fantastic, Emma said. Love the transparency, really feeling informed and safe here. I have been saying for decades that the supernatural community needs better disclosure protocols, Basil said, apparently to himself. There is a counterspell, Felix said, cutting him off with the ease of someone who had been cutting off Basil for decades. Isn't there? There is. I'm researching it. The text I need is in a private collection in Vienna. The collector is a vampire who has not returned my calls since 1991. Why not? Emma asked. He believes I am, quote, tedious and paranoid. Basil said this with the wounded dignity of a man who had been accurately described and resented it. I believe he's avoiding me. Can't imagine why, Emma murmured. I will find the text, Basil said, gathering his papers. These things take time. Weeks, possibly months. In the interim, the bond will continue to deepen. I recommend maintaining close proximity and avoiding emotional escalation. Emotional escalation, Emma repeated. Strong feelings accelerate the resonance. Stay calm, stay neutral. Do not, under any circumstances, develop personal attachment. He said this to both of them. Felix's expression did not change. Emma's expression did not change. Neither of them looked at each other. Manageable, Felix said. Entirely, Emma agreed. Basil looked between them, his paranoid instincts clearly firing on all cylinders, and left without another word. After he was gone, the apartment felt different. Not worse, just charged. The air between Emma and Felix had a texture it hadn't had before. She could feel him in the room even when she wasn't looking. A low hum of presence, like standing near a generator. You felt it too, Felix said, without looking up from the book he'd been reading, one of her paperbacks, a battered copy of Good Omens. He was holding it with the careful detachment of an anthropologist handling an artifact. Felt what? The pull. Don't pretend you didn't. She had. A warmth in her sternum when he was near. A vague, directionless awareness of where he was sitting, how still he was being. It was intimate in a way that embarrassed her. It's the bond, she said. Obviously. So it doesn't mean anything? Obviously not. Can I ask you something? You've been asking me things continuously for 4 days. I don't see how I could stop you. The not breathing thing. Is that... Do you just forget? Or is it a choice? Breathing is optional. I do it when I remember because humans find the alternative disconcerting. You haven't breathed in the last 20 minutes. I've been reading. I forget when I'm focused. That's incredibly creepy. I'm aware. What else is different, physically? Why do you want to know? Because I'm sharing a flat with a vampire and I'd like to know the operating parameters. Think of it as an onboarding document for cohabitation. Something shifted in his expression, amusement maybe, buried under 3 layers of composure. My heart beats approximately once per hour. My body temperature is several degrees below yours. I heal from most injuries within minutes. I can hear a heartbeat from 30 feet away. Can you hear mine right now? Yes. What does it sound like? Fast. I'm sitting still. I know. He turned a page. It's been fast since Basil mentioned the destabilization. That's because the destabilization sounds terrifying. That's one explanation. What's the other explanation? He didn't answer. He turned another page. His stillness was a wall, the kind of wall that people build when the honest answer is too expensive. Right, she said. I'm going to make tea. The herbal kind? Why, is herbal tea a witch thing? I have no idea. Basil would say yes. Basil says everything is a thing. I'm making chamomile. Then I'll have a cup. She stopped. You drink tea now? I've decided to investigate it, as a hobby. Tea. Your new hobby is tea. It's a beginning. She made 2 cups, chamomile. He held his the way he'd held the first one, wrapping both hands around the warmth, as if it were something he'd been missing. She tried not to watch him do it. She watched him do it. The silence that followed was very loud. Chapter 3. The Pattern. On day 10, Emma lost a client. They went with a different designer, she said, reading the email for the 3rd time. Someone who better understood their holistic vision. Which client? Felix asked from the couch. He'd been reading her 3rd Terry Pratchett. He was moving through her shelf with the systematic focus of a man who had rediscovered the concept of entertainment. The yoga studio, 3 weeks of work, 17 rounds of revisions. And they want someone who better understands them. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. They sell overpriced leggings and call it enlightenment, Felix. Their holistic vision is a contradiction in terms. Show me their brief. What? Their creative brief, the document describing what they wanted. I know what a brief is. Why do you want to see it? Because you've been working on this for 3 weeks, and I've been sitting 6 feet away listening to you mutter about mandalas. I have developed opinions. You've developed opinions about yoga studio branding? I've developed opinions about the people requesting it. Show me the brief. She pulled up the brief. He walked over, the closest he'd voluntarily come to her since the binding, and read it over her shoulder. His proximity was a cold current. Not unpleasant, just different. The temperature drop you feel walking into a stone church in summer. They're lying, he said, after 30 seconds. Excuse me? They used the word flow 7 times. They rejected every design with curved lines. They use serenity 4 times. They're drawn to sharp, angular compositions. He tapped the screen. They don't want peace. They want the appearance of peace wrapped around the reality of ambition. They want to look spiritual while communicating wealth. Emma stared at the brief. She'd read it 40 times. She had not seen this. Give them a lotus, he said, but render it with the facets of a cut diamond. Gold gradient, clean geometric lines. It will appeal to what they actually want, while allowing them to believe they're being authentic. That's... She turned to look at him. He was close. Very close. The cold radiating off him was like standing near an open window in December. That's exactly what they want. How did you know that? I spent 50 years navigating a court where everyone said the opposite of what they meant. Reading vanity is not a skill I lost when I stopped caring about most things. Most things? He didn't answer that. He went back to the couch. She designed the logo. Diamond-faceted lotus, gold gradient, geometric clean. She sent it to the studio, not as an official submission, just a final thought before we part ways. 40 minutes later, her email pinged. Oh my God, Emma, this is it, she read aloud. You've perfectly captured our core essence. We're crying, literally crying. Can we reinstate the contract? She spun in her chair. Felix was reading. He did not look up. Felix. You just saved a £3,000 contract. It was a trivial observation. It was not trivial. That was brilliant. You're brilliant. His hand, the one holding the book, went very still. The kind of still she'd started recognizing, the too controlled, too held stillness that meant something had gotten through the wall. I was merely passing the time, he said, to the book. You were helping me. I was sitting nearby while you worked. Any insight was incidental. Felix. What? You can just say, you're welcome. A pause. Then, so quiet she almost missed it. You're welcome. She smiled. He did not see it because he was aggressively reading a Terry Pratchett novel. But his jaw was tight in a way that had nothing to do with the plot. The feeding happened on day 14. She hadn't meant it to. They'd been researching. Basil's counterspell hunt had hit a wall, the Vienna collector still dodging his calls, and Emma had taken to reading occult forums the way she'd once doom-scrolled property listings. Felix sat across from her at the kitchen table, annotating a handwritten text Basil had couriered over, his handwriting small and precise and old-fashioned. She noticed the change gradually. He was slower. Not in movement, vampires don't slow down, but in attention. His focus drifted. His annotating hand stopped. He went still in a way that wasn't his usual controlled stillness. This was different. Rigid. Held. When did you last eat? She asked. I don't eat. Feed, drink, whatever the word is. The word is irrelevant. When, Felix? His eyes, when he looked up, were darker than usual. Not glowing, nothing so theatrical. Just deeper. The brown gone almost black, with a thin ring of amber at the edge that hadn't been there before. The thermos supply has been less effective, he said, choosing each word with the care of a man crossing a frozen river. The bond is affecting my metabolism. Basil's supply is adequate for maintenance. It is no longer adequate for, a pause, equilibrium. What do you need? It's manageable. You say that word a lot, she put down her phone. You know what my worst clients do? They say, it's fine, 17 times and then have a breakdown in the bathroom. I'm very good at spotting the 17th fine, Felix, and you are well past it. He looked at her. The amber ring in his eyes was wider now, and there was something behind his expression that she hadn't seen before. Not hunger exactly, but the effort of suppressing it. She could see it in his jaw, in the tendons of his hands where they gripped the edge of the table. What you need, she said quietly, is real blood from a person. That is not going to happen. I'm sitting right here. Which is precisely the problem. Felix. She held out her wrist. The gesture was simple, practical. The way you'd hand someone a glass of water. I'm offering. You need it. The bond is getting worse because you're running on fumes. Just take what you need, and we'll pretend this was a normal Tuesday. He stared at her wrist. His whole body had gone rigid, every line of him held taut, like a wire under tension. She could feel the bond humming between them, a vibration in her chest. This is a terrible idea, he said. Most of my ideas are terrible. I summoned a vampire with bath tea lights and a forum post. My judgment is not the issue here. He reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, not ice, but noticeably, undeniably cooler than hers. The contrast when his thumb pressed against the inside of her wrist was sharp enough that she inhaled. Your pulse is elevated, he observed. No kidding. It won't hurt, but it will feel intimate. The bond will amplify it, for both of us. I know. You cannot know. You've never... Felix, I read people for a living. I can see what this is costing you to ask. Just do it. He brought her wrist to his mouth. His lips were cool against her skin. She felt the brush of something sharp, not pain, just pressure, and then a warmth that had no business being there, spreading from the point of contact up through her arm and into her chest. The bond between them flared like a struck bell. She could feel him, not his thoughts, nothing that clear, just his presence, vast and cold and old, rushing up against the edges of her awareness like an ocean meeting a shore. His eyes closed. The rigid tension in his body released, not into relaxation but into something rawer, relief maybe, or surrender. His thumb traced a small circle against her palm, and she didn't think he knew he was doing it. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then he pulled away, carefully, the way you set down something fragile. There was no blood on his lips, just a faint color in his cheeks that hadn't been there before, a ghost of warmth, borrowed, temporary. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough. "You're welcome." Her voice was rough too. She pulled her wrist back and pressed her thumb against the place where his mouth had been. 2 small marks, already closing. The skin was warm. "Does it always feel like that?" she asked. "I don't know. I haven't fed from someone in a long time." "How long?" "Long enough that I'd forgotten what it was like." "And what is it like, from your end?" He looked at her, really looked, not the careful avoidance he'd been practicing for 2 weeks. Like someone turned the volume up on everything. "For 30 seconds, I could hear your heartbeat the way I can hear this conversation. I could feel what you were feeling." "What was I feeling?" "Scared, and not scared, both at once." "That's accurate." "And warm." He said this very quietly. "You were warm." "I'm always warm, Felix. It's a mammal thing." "Not like that. Not—" He stopped, reset. The mask settled back into place, like a door closing. "The bond is stabilized." That was the relevant outcome. "Right, the relevant outcome." "Yes. Not the part where you could feel my emotions. That was a side effect." "A side effect." "Entirely incidental." "You're doing the thing again." "What thing?" "The thing where you say words that mean the opposite of what's happening on your face." His jaw tightened. The muscle at his temple worked once, a ghost memory of a pulse that wasn't there. "My face is not doing anything." "Your face is doing several things, Felix. I design brand identities for a living. I am professionally trained to read visual communication. And your face is currently communicating that you are full of shit." He looked at her. She looked at him. The bond hummed between them, quieter now, sated, but present. Always present. "I am going back to the Pratchett," he said. "Good idea. This conversation is concluded." "Absolutely." He went back to the couch. She went back to her forums. Potato jumped on the table between them and demanded attention, and the moment dissolved into the ordinary. But her wrist was warm where his mouth had been for the rest of the night, and from the living room, the sound of pages turning had stopped for a very long time before it started again. Chapter 4. The Cost. By day 20, the bond was no longer something they could pretend was merely inconvenient. Emma woke up knowing where Felix was in the apartment before she opened her eyes. She could feel his stillness through the wall, that particular held quality that meant he was sitting on the couch, not sleeping, existing in the patient way that vampires do when they've run out of things to pretend to be interested in. Except he hadn't run out of things to pretend, not anymore. She'd caught him watching nature documentaries at 4 a.m. with a focus that bordered on scholarly. She'd found a list on the kitchen counter in his precise handwriting. Delivery apps to investigate. Deliveroo, Uber Eats, that one Emma mentioned with the burritos. He was investigating delivery apps. Felix Bellamy, who had not voluntarily engaged with a new experience since the Blair government, was researching how to have food brought to a door. "You're taking notes," she said, finding him at the table with his flip phone open and a notepad. "I am cataloging options. For delivery apps. Your eating habits are erratic and nutritionally catastrophic. If I am going to be tethered to you, you should at least be adequately fed." "You care about my nutrition now?" "I care about the bond's stability. Your blood sugar affects it." "My blood sugar?" "It's a factor." She sat down across from him. "Felix, you're allowed to just say you're doing something nice." I am doing something practical. You made a spreadsheet comparing burrito delivery services. The data varied significantly between providers. You ranked them by speed and by salsa options? He closed the notepad. The salsa data was relevant. She grinned. He looked away. The amber ring in his eyes, she'd started thinking of it as his tell, the way a poker player's hand twitches, was visible at the edges. This is not what I expected, he said after a moment. Being bound to a freelance graphic designer by witch magic? Caring about something. He said it flat, like reading a weather report. I had rather comprehensively stopped doing that. It was easier. Easier than what? He didn't answer. She didn't push. She'd learned that pushing Felix produced nothing. He just went stiller, held himself tighter, retreated behind manageable like a drawbridge. The things he actually felt came out sideways, in salsa spreadsheets and quiet observations about her blood sugar. The counterspell arrived on day 22. Basil came through the door with the energy of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. He set a sheaf of papers on the kitchen table, aligned them with his customary precision, and said, I have the text. I have verified it against 3 independent sources. The binding can be broken. That's brilliant, Emma said. Basil did not look like it was brilliant. Felix, on the couch, had gone still in the wrong way, the rigid way, the way that meant he already knew what was coming. The incantation requires a sacrifice of equivalence, Basil said. The binding was formed by word and by blood, her witch blood activated by the spoken phrase. To break it, the bond must be severed by an act of equivalent loss. What kind of loss? Emma asked. One of us, Emma said. Which one? Either. The spell is symmetrical, but the loss must be total. And if we don't break it? The destabilization continues. His vampire nature continues to amplify in your direction. Your dormant craft continues to surface. He paused. The end state, historically, has been unkind. To both parties. How unkind? I have documented 17 cases across 4 centuries. In 12, the vampire lost control of their predator instincts entirely. In 5, the witch descendants' dormant power surged beyond their ability to contain it. In all 17, the outcome was permanent and irreversible. You're saying we either break the bond, or it breaks us. I'm saying the bond is not a stable state. It is a process, and it has an endpoint that neither of you will enjoy. Felix stood up. Thank you, Basil. Leave the papers. I should mention, leave the papers, Basil. Basil set them down. He looked at Emma. She looked back. In his eyes, ancient, paranoid, relentlessly observant, she saw something that might have been pity. I was right about the witch lines, he said quietly. I wish I hadn't been. He left. The door closed. Felix stood in the middle of Emma's tiny living room, his hands at his sides, his face wearing the most perfect mask of absolute nothing she had ever seen. We'll figure something out, she said. Yes, he said. We will. She found the evidence 3 days later. She hadn't been snooping. She'd been looking for her phone charger, which had migrated behind the couch cushions. Instead, she found the notebook, Basil's handwriting, not Felix's, listing spell components. Candles. Specific herbs. A phrase in Old Tongue with phonetic pronunciation carefully noted, and beside it, in Felix's precise hand, Wednesday. After she leaves for the print shop, Basil will be here at 10. Today was Wednesday. It was 9:47 a.m. She walked into the kitchen. Felix was standing at the counter. The herbs were already laid out. The candles were already lit, not her vanilla tea lights, but tall, dark tapers that smelled like dust and iron. What are you doing? She said. Not a question. She could see what he was doing. It's manageable, he said. Don't you dare use that word right now. He turned to face her. His expression was still flat, still controlled, but something was fracturing behind it. She'd spent 25 days learning his tells. The jaw, the temple, the hands that went still when his body wanted to move. The spell requires one of us to forget, he said. I am the logical choice. I have 150 years of existing without you. You have a life, a career, a world that does not involve. He gestured at himself. This. The forgetting will be less disruptive for me. Less disruptive. Yes. You were going to erase me from your life without asking me. I was going to solve the problem by making a unilateral decision about something that belongs to both of us. It is the rational course of rational. She stepped forward. You know what's rational? Asking, communicating, having a conversation like two people who have spent 3.5 weeks sharing a kitchen and a cat and a moment that I am not going to reduce to the word incident. That's rational. Emma, you don't get to do this. You don't get to spend 40 years opting out of everything and then find something that matters and then opt out of that too. That is not bravery. That is not sacrifice. That is the same cowardice you've been running on since 1980 whatever. His composure shattered. Not cracked, shattered. Like a window hit by a stone. Because it does matter. His voice came out raw, stripped of every layer of control he'd built. Because you are the first thing that has mattered in 40 years, and the bond is destroying you, and I cannot. He stopped. His hands were shaking. Felix Bellamy, who had not shown a visible emotion in 4 decades, was shaking. I cannot watch it take you apart. I would rather forget. I would rather have nothing again than watch the nothing happen to you. And what about me? She was crying now, which she hated, which she'd sworn she wouldn't do. I don't get to forget, Felix. I get to live in this apartment knowing someone was here. Someone who helped me with a yoga studio logo and made a salsa spreadsheet and read all my Terry Pratchett's and held my wrist like it was made of glass. And I won't understand why the couch smells like cold stone, or why I keep making 2 cups of tea, or why the cat keeps sitting on a coat that isn't there anymore. His face changed. Something in him, something older than the boredom, older than the denial, something that had been buried under 40 years of quiet quitting, surfaced. You would remember, he said. Not flat, not managed, just a man realizing something for the first time. You would remember all of it. Of course I would remember. That's the whole point. You don't get to decide for both of us. He sank into the kitchen chair, the tapers guttered. He put his head in his hands, and the gesture was so human, so utterly un-vampire, the posture of a man who has run out of ways to hold himself together, that it broke something in her too. She pulled out the chair across from him, sat down, pulled Basil's notes toward her. Give me the text, she said. Emma. The counterspell text, the original, not Basil's translation, the old tongue original. He looked up. His eyes were wet, which shouldn't have been possible. She'd assumed vampires couldn't cry, but the bond was doing strange things to both of them. Why? Because I read briefs for a living. She pulled her laptop over. And in my experience, the first translation is never the whole story. Chapter 5. The Release. It took her 4 hours. She sat at the kitchen table with the old tongue text, 3 different translation references Basil had left, and the same pattern recognition brain she used to decode what clients actually wanted versus what they said they wanted. Felix sat across from her. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He had, at one point, made her a cup of tea, her mug, the right amount of milk, no sugar, and set it down without comment. It was the first time he'd ever used her kettle. The problem, she said at hour 2, is that Basil translated val ekthari as forget, which is correct. It is one meaning. But old tongue words have contextual weight. Basil noted that himself in his 1987 memo, and by the way, the man has memos going back to the Cold War. He's either deeply paranoid or deeply prescient. He's both. It's his defining quality. In a binding context, Val Ekthari doesn't mean forget, as in erase the memory. It means release, as in let go of your hold on something. She turned the laptop to face him, her notes beside it. The distinction is, okay, it's like this. A client says, I want to move on from this project. Another client says, I want to forget this project ever happened. Both use the word move on, but the first one is a conscious decision to proceed forward. The second is erasure. The Old Tongue word contains both meanings, but the binding spell is a contract, and in contract language, you use the term that matches the intent of the original agreement. And the original agreement? Was a binding, an anchoring. Voluntary release of an anchor is not destruction, it's uncoupling. You let go of the dock, the boat doesn't cease to exist. It just floats free. Felix leaned forward. You're saying the spell doesn't require amnesia. I'm saying the spell requires surrender, willingness. Both parties have to consciously, voluntarily, release their hold on the bond. Not forget each other, let go of the magical connection between them. Both parties. Both. That's why your unilateral version wouldn't have worked, even if you'd gone through with it. The spell requires mutual action. You can't untie a knot by pulling only one end. Basil missed this. Basil translated the word correctly, he just used the wrong contextual meaning. He's a conspiracy theorist, Felix. He defaulted to the worst-case interpretation because that's what he does. The text supports the gentler reading. He sat back. Something moved across his face. Not relief exactly, something larger. The expression of a man who has been bracing for impact and learned the car has stopped. You're certain. I'm certain. I've read bad contracts for a living for 6 years. I've caught landlords burying penalty clauses in paragraph 9. I've spotted a £4,000 licensing fee hidden in an appendix. I can read between the lines of a supernatural binding spell, Felix. This is literally what I do. You design dog biscuit logos. I design dog biscuit logos and I read contracts. I contain multitudes. The corner of his mouth moved, not the ghost of a smile this time, the actual thing. Small, reluctant, as if his face had forgotten the mechanics and was rebuilding them from scratch. So we let go, he said. We let go of the spell, not each other. She paused. Unless you want to let go of each other too. That's also an option. You'd be free. You could go back to your flat and your flip phone and your... No. No? No, I do not want to let go of... No. He said it flat, definitive, the most unbored he had sounded in the entire 25 days. That is not what I want. What do you want? I want to answer that question after the spell is broken, when the bond isn't a factor, when I can be certain that what I feel is mine and not the magic's. That's either very romantic or very cautious. I've been told I'm both. Who told you that? You did, yesterday, when I alphabetized your spice rack. You alphabetized my spice rack? It was disorganized to the point of culinary negligence. She laughed. It was wet and messy and not elegant at all, and his eyes tracked it the way they tracked everything about her now, with the careful, helpless attention of a man who had forgotten how to look away. Are you ready? She asked. No. Me neither. Let's do it anyway. They faced each other across the kitchen table, her hands on the surface, his opposite, not touching. The bond between them was a tangible thing. She could almost see it, a shimmer in the air, the residue of 25 days of proximity and cold hands and borrowed blood and a salsa spreadsheet. Val Ekthari, she said, and the word in her mouth felt different than the first spell had. Not clumsy, not borrowed, but true. Her word. Her blood recognizing its own language. Val Ekthari, he said, and his voice was rough. They said it together, the third time. And as they did, they both, consciously, deliberately, with full knowledge of what they were releasing, let go. The bond snapped. Not violently, gently, like a thread pulled free from a hem. The hum in her chest went quiet. The cold current of his presence receded to the ordinary cold of a man sitting 4 feet away. He inhaled. She realized she'd never actually heard him breathe voluntarily before. Not the performative breathing he did to seem normal, but a real, reflexive intake of air. As if his body had remembered something it didn't need to do, but wanted to. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done." He stood up. He walked to the door of her apartment, opened it, stepped into the hallway, waited. Nothing happened. No weakness, no pull, no deterioration. He was free. He stood in the hallway for a long time. She sat at the kitchen table and watched him through the open door and felt the specific, terrible weight of a person choosing not to ask someone to stay. He turned around, walked back to the doorway, leaned against the frame with a careful nonchalance that would have been convincing if his hands hadn't been shaking. "Your kettle," he said, "is descaled incorrectly. You're getting limescale in every cup." "I know. And your filing system for client briefs is disorganized to the point of professional negligence." "Also aware. And the leg on that table still wobbles. I offered to fix it in week 1. You said, and I quote, 'The wobble has character.' It does have character. It has structural instability. Those are different things. Felix, and I would very much like to not leave." He said it flat, matter of fact, like a weather report. But his eyes, dark brown, the amber ring just a thread now without the bond's amplification, but still there if you knew where to look, were not flat at all. "The bond is gone. The magic is gone. What I feel right now is not a spell. It is not a side effect. It is not incidental. It is mine. And I would like to stay, if that is acceptable." What happened to the man who doesn't do things for fun? He met a woman who summoned him with mispronounced old tongue and vanilla tea lights. The ghost of a smile. The real one. He's been reconsidering his position. She stood up. Walked to the doorway where he stood, in the hallway that had been his limit for 25 days, the hallway that no longer held any power over either of them. "The couch is still terrible," she said. "I am aware. And I still have the dog biscuit deadline. I have opinions about the font. You always have opinions about the font. Your serif choices lack conviction." She kissed him, standing in the hallway, in her pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, with the overhead fluorescent buzzing its tuneless song above them. His lips were cool. Her hands, when she put them on his jaw, were warm. He made a small sound against her mouth, surprise, maybe, or the noise a person makes when they've been holding their breath for 40 years and finally stop. His hands found her waist, cold fingers through thin cotton. She shivered, not from the chill but from the specificity of it, him, choosing to touch her. Not because a bond demanded proximity, but because he wanted to, because he had opted back in. When they pulled apart, his expression was the most unmanageable thing she had ever seen on his carefully managed face. "Well," he said, his voice was wrecked. "That was... If you say manageable, I will resummon you and send you somewhere worse. I was going to say, worth the wait." He paused. "It has been a considerable wait." She took his hand, cold, long-fingered, steady, and pulled him back inside. Potato was sitting on the kitchen table next to the abandoned spell components, looking at them both with the weary tolerance of a cat who has seen too much. "The spell components need clearing up," Emma said. "I'll do it. And Basil needs to know the bond broke. I'll text him. On your flip phone. It sends texts. I've mentioned this." She sat at her desk. He cleared the table. The afternoon light came through the window, diffused, gray, the particular quality of light that exists in London apartments where nothing dramatic is happening and 2 people are simply, quietly, choosing to share a space. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "The kettle instructions are on page 4 of the manual. You kept the manual. It is in the drawer beneath the toaster. F." She looked over at him. He was washing her mug at the sink, his sleeves rolled up, his expression one of mild concentration. "Did you just text me from 6 feet away?" The flip phone has its uses. You could have just said it. Some things, he said, not looking up from the mug, are easier in writing. She looked at her phone again, scrolled up. There was a second message, sent 30 seconds before the kettle one, that she'd missed. I am not between interests anymore. Emma smiled at her phone. She did not show him. She did not need to. Some things land harder when they arrive quietly, in the small, specific gestures of a man who has decided, after 40 years of sitting, to stand up. She went back to her branding guide. He went back to the couch with her fourth Terry Pratchett. Outside, London did its London thing, gray and noisy and relentless. Inside, a vampire who had forgotten how to care about anything, and a graphic designer who was afraid to care about anything too much, sat in the same room and didn't talk and didn't need to. Potato settled between them, equidistant, claiming the warm spot. The flip phone buzzed one more time. The salsa spreadsheet has been updated. The ranking has changed. Felix? You're texting me from the couch. I find I have a new interest. Salsa rankings? Texting. She threw a cushion at him. He caught it without looking up from the Pratchett, one-handed, with the reflexes of a creature 150 years old that had once, briefly, forgotten what reflexes were for. And in the kitchen, the vanilla tea lights sat in their little holders, unlit, unnecessary, their work accidental, clumsy, ridiculous, and entirely sufficient, already done.